The Sacramento Kings are exactly halfway through the regular season, hitting the 41 game mark. And so it is time. It is time for the mid-season grades for the Kings. Last year, I did this exact same thing, rating both the team and every single player from 1 to 10 based on how well that they've been playing, and it takes into account things like expectations. So say if you're a two-way player who cracks the rotation, maybe you get a 10 out of 10. And, if you're a star player who's not meeting expectations, you could be a 3 out of 10. It takes into account expectations. The Kings are in a kind of a weird spot right now because at the 41 game mark, they have the exact same record as they did last season, 23 and 18. But everyone always wants progress. You want to be better than last season. And so, of course, many Kings fans will be kind of disappointed, especially with this last stretch of games. The last 4 games leading up to the midway point of the season have been very disappointing. A 4-game losing streak, some incredible historic chokes in there. And so the Kings sit in 7th place in the Western Conference, right outside of the top 6 playoffs. They're in the play-in right now. And the team has just been very up and down. Now, coming into the season, the Kings ran it back with mostly the same roster, relying on internal improvement to get better from last season. And you have seen improvement from some guys, but you've also seen other guys who are playing worse than they were last season. And so that's led to them having the exact same record as last season. I've said many times that I thought that the Kings' ceiling this season, if they make no moves and have this exact roster throughout the entire season, the absolute ceiling is a conference finals appearance. If everything goes right, if they have good matchups in the playoffs, teams that they match up well against, because I think there are certain teams that they definitely match up a lot better against than others. Now, I do question that a little bit, whether they could really make the conference finals, but I do think they could definitely make it to the second round. I mean, they were very close last season to making it to the second round, and I don't expect this to be the roster that ends the season. I expect changes to be made at the trade deadline because it's very clear that the roster is not balanced and there needs to be more size and better defensive players on the wing. I'll start out by giving a rating to the entire team. Now, last season at this point, I gave the team a 9 out of 10, surpassing many people's expectations. Things were going extremely well. And obviously being on a 4-game losing streak coming into me making this definitely doesn't help things, but I'm going to try to push that aside because every team goes through some bad spells. And I do want to encompass the entire 41 games and not let the last 4 games affect the ratings too much. And so I'm giving the Kings a 5 out of 10. I think that's very fair to give a very average rating or right on average rating for a team that ran it back with the exact same roster and got the exact same record at the halfway point. So I think it only makes sense to have it be a even 5 out of 10. We've seen the defense improve slightly from last season. We've seen the offense take a step back from last season. The Kings have kind of finally found their rotation that they want to use moving forward. It took a while, but they've finally found kind of the 8 guys that they're going to trust, at least until they add pieces at the trade deadline. I don't think anyone expected the historic offense from last season to completely carry over. I don't think anyone expected the Kings to have the number 1 offense again. That just seems a bit unrealistic. But I do think it has taken a bigger step back than most people expected. And like I said, the defense has also taken a bit of a step up. And we've just seen games that either go really well or go really poorly. And so that has a big impact on net ratings, where you have these big blowout losses and the bench is being emptied midway through the third quarter. And so that has a big effect on net ratings. And so just from the eye test, I think the Kings offense is still very, very good, especially when you have shooters actually making shots, which at some points of the season that hasn't happened. And I do think at times the defense has looked a little bit better. And so I think they do just totally cancel out. And so it leads to a 5 out of 10 rating. But diving into the specific players where we can go a little deeper into why things are happening, I'm going to start with De'Aaron Fox. Now, last season at the midway point, I had given him a 9 out of 10 rating. And so at the midway point this season, I'm going to give him an 8.5 out of 10. He started out the season absolutely on fire. Now his three-point shooting has improved drastically, and that has been consistent from the very first game in the season to game 41. His three-point shooting has been a massive improvement, and that has opened up a lot of things for his game. He was scoring 30 points per game for a lot of the season. He missed 5 games early in the season, but bounced back pretty quickly and kind of picked up where he left off of just being on a scoring tear. He's maintained the same level of defensive intensity from last season, and he can be a great defender when he's locked in. And last season, he was putting up historic numbers, both in the clutch, obviously winning Clutch Player of the Year, but also in terms of finishing around the rim. He was also amazing in the mid-range, and those things, especially the mid-range shots, those have kind of been replaced by his three-point shooting. And in a similar vein to always kind of expecting the historic Kings offense from last season to take a step back, I also expected Fox's insane finishing numbers and clutch numbers to also take a bit of a step back because they were just so incredible. But he has been pretty poor in the clutch this year as opposed to last year, and that is a big reason the Kings have lost games, especially lately. His free throw shooting has been really poor, but he is also very clearly playing through injury, and he has done that in past seasons as well. Last season, he pretty much had the exact same stretch early in the season of clearly playing through injury. His numbers took a big hit, and that same thing is happening right now. And so I expect him, as the season goes on, he'll kind of ramp things up and start playing better than he has been lately. But where his rating took a hit for me was really just his clutch performances, because that was part of what made last season so special for him. Now moving on to the second player, Domantas Sabonis, who in my opinion has been the Kings' best player this year. And it's amazing what playing with 2 hands will be able to do for a guy. I feel like people just forget or didn't even know that Sabonis was playing with a broken right thumb for almost all of last season. And so last season at this point, Sabonis got a 10 out of 10. I'm dropping that to a 9 out of 10. And so Fox, 8.5, Sabonis at a 9, kind of just dropping because of the expectations that we have now. They've both been really, really good. But with Sabonis, there was so much criticism of him for the playoff series. And yeah, he definitely wasn't amazing in that playoff series. But 2 things that people just kind of fail to account for. One, Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes couldn't hit a 3-point shot. And so that hurts a lot when another team can just totally swarm Sabonis in the post, and Sabonis is kicking out to wide open shooters and they're just missing shots. But I think the other thing is, like I said, he had a broken thumb. Like, he could not finish or do anything with his right hand. And so this season, he's been finishing a lot with his right hand. His finishing has been great. His offensive decision-making has been really good, and his playmaking has also been amazing, and his assist numbers have gone up from last season, and that is despite the dribble handoff game between him and Kevin Huerter dropping off quite significantly because of Kevin Huerter's shooting struggles this season. So much of the Kings' offensive success last season was because of the partnership between Kevin Huerter and Domantas Sabonis, and with Kevin Huerter playing very poorly for a lot of the season. He's come back around lately, but he was playing pretty poorly. Sabonis was still finding ways to get the offense going. He's second in the NBA in triple doubles. He's been dominating the glass, and it is one of the main, he is the reason that the Kings are one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the league. He's also a beast on the offensive glass. He's been much better defensively. He's been great in terms of going vertical at the rim and altering shots. He's just been amazing and remains one of the most underrated players in the NBA because people just, I think, don't really understand the things that he does so well, or don't really value them as much as just a guy pulling up and hitting a three. But he has been amazing this year, and in my mind is just a lock for a fourth all-star appearance. Now moving on to the third guy, the guy who I would say is the third best player in at least the starting lineup, if not the team. That is our second year player, our precious Keegan Murray, who last season had a great rookie season, broke the 3-point rookie record. I gave him a 7 out of 10. When I was recording this, I forgot to actually say what rating I was giving Keegan Murray, so I'm giving him a 9 out of 10. But for the most part, he was just a 3-point shooter. An amazing one, and that is extremely valuable, especially at his size. But all the talk in the summer was about how much he was improving in terms of his off-the-dribble game. And it has definitely showed. He's creating way more off the dribble. His step backs feel almost automatic. He started off the season pretty slow in terms of his shooting numbers, but a lot of that I think had to do with him getting used to the assignments he was taking defensively, which I'll definitely get to. But he's been great creating for himself in the mid-range and getting all the way to the rim. He is truly shedding that low ceiling that people had put on him. And with all the talk being about his offense coming into this season, the true surprise has been the strides that he's made defensively. Last season, he was a guy that opposing offenses would pick on. They would look at him and they would put him in the action and try to have him be the one guarding the ball because he was a traffic cone out there. He was just slow and was just not at all good defensively. And this season, he has made the leap to being one of the Kings' best defenders, no doubt the best wing defender. His on-ball defense has been incredible. He's getting assignments like Steph Curry, Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker, and doing a really, really good job on those guys, using his length to bother shots. And so he's made strides on both sides of the ball. And the only reason that he's not a 10 out of 10 is because I just want him to shoot the ball more. I want him to use his offensive skills even more than he already is. I think at times he can just be too passive, and I want him to truly embrace being the third option on this team, and even could be the second option in terms of scoring the ball. Now I'm going to keep going through the starting lineup first before we get to the bench. But after the top three, I'm giving good ratings to the top three, but there's still a reason that the Kings as a whole have only been a 5 out of 10. So there's a pretty big drop off here. And so we go to Kevin Huerter. Kevin Huerter last season was a big surprise. Now, I always thought he could come in and be a solid player, but averaging 15 points per game, being a 40% three-point shooter, being able to score in the mid-range and kind of create for others as well, he was amazing. Now, this season, he really has struggled. At the start of the season, or in the preseason, there was even a little experimentation with putting Chris Duarte in the starting lineup to add a little defense to the Kings starting lineup. Now, Kevin Huerter retained his starting spot and was pretty good at the start of the season. And he's always an up and down player, a confidence player who just, he's a guy that you just have to kind of ride the roller coaster with. But he had a very big down spell this year. Just horrible shooting numbers. And the difference between last season and this season is last season when his three-point shot wasn't going down, his mid-rangers, his finishing around the rim, those things he could still turn to and he could still score in those ways. And this season, those things completely dropped off. He lost all confidence, was so inconsistent offensively, or even for a large time, consistently horrible. And so he gets a 4 out of 10. And the reason it isn't lower than a 4 out of 10 is because he still does contribute in other ways. And when he is playing well, that just unlocks the Kings offense. And he makes this team so much better. He's not a great point of attack defender, but he still can contribute in other ways defensively. His team defense is pretty good. His rotations are usually pretty good and his rebounding is pretty good. But he can definitely get burned in terms of one-on-one defending. He's been really good these last few games, and so hopefully he can continue on that. It is hard to watch a player who is so up and down, but he can add so much to this team, and you can never fault his effort. He did get taken out of the starting lineup for a little bit for Chris Duarte, but quickly realized that that wasn't going to work out, and we need Huerter to be that guy that performs for this team to reach its ceiling. And now the last member of the starting lineup, Harrison Barnes, who he has been really bad. No way to sugarcoat this one. I am giving Barnes a 2 out of 10. For this team to make a leap forward, they need to replace Harrison Barnes in the starting lineup. That is very clear. Last season, he got an 8 out of 10. He was a solid three-point shooter. Wasn't a great defender, but he wasn't horrible last season. And he was very good at getting into the paint, drawing fouls. He was getting about 5 free throw attempts per game. This season, that element of his game has completely disappeared. He looks so slow, can't draw the same fouls. Honestly, he got a superstar whistle last year, and I never understood it because Fox and Sabonis were out there getting clobbered, not getting free throws, and then Harrison Barnes would just like lightly bump into a guy and would get free throws. I never understood it. He's not getting those same calls this year, and rightfully so. But he just looks so slow. The only reason he's not a 1 out of 10 is because he's still shooting well from 3, but he's just not adding anything else offensively, and his defense has just been abysmal. Like I talk about Huerter not being a great point of attack defender, but still contributing in other ways. Harrison Barnes is one of, if not the worst rebounder in the NBA, and that is for your 6'8" power forward to not be rebounding the ball. And he just provides no help defensively, can't defend at the point of attack. The only way that he is going to have a good defensive possession is if some guy decides to put him in the post and then just try to fade over him, because he can stand there and put his hand up, but that's about all he can do. He just got a 3-year $54 million contract this offseason, and I thought that it was a fine move because $18 million a year, it's not crazy money for your 5th starter. And he was solid last year. He wasn't good in the playoffs, but he was solid in the regular season. But he has just completely disappeared, and that contract looks horrible. And I think we need to trade him, or at least trade for someone to put in the starting lineup. He'll most likely be involved in the trade. If he's not, sure, I could see him being a solid bench player, but he just can't be in the starting lineup for this team. Now moving on to the bench, we go to our 6th man, Malik Monk. And, him and De'Aaron Fox, for me, they're the hardest guys to rate because they're the guys that performed just absolutely terribly in these last 3-4 games and are the reason that we lost those games, like Malik Monk just not being able to shoot free throws now. And so they're the hardest for me to I just got to not factor those in as much as, it feels like I should right now. But other than these last few games, Malik Monk has been incredible this season. And so I'm giving him a 9 out of 10. He got an 8 out of 10 at this point last year. He's just been way more consistent than last year. Been a beast in terms of operating in the pick and roll. His 3-point shooting has been great. He's been usually, except for these last few games, usually very good and very important in the clutch, because in the clutch, what this team does is they give the ball to Fox or they give the ball to Monk. Maybe they set him a screen and they just say, go create something. They don't really run their normal offense in clutch time, which I think is pretty normal. But because the Kings don't have a lot of ball handling and creation outside of Fox and Monk, those two guys are so important. And so Monk is incredibly important when Fox doesn't have it going, or even when he does, but other teams are trying to take him away. Monk has been great, especially in overtime games. He's overtime Monk. And so hopefully he can just put these last few games out of his head and get the free throw thing under control, because he's our best free throw shooter. And he's just missed 13 free throws in his last 3 or 4 games. But he has been great this season. Now the next guy is Trey Lyles. Lyles last season got a 9 out of 10 at this point. His expectations were pretty low. coming into last season, and so that's why I got the 9 out of 10. This season, the expectations are higher because we know he's a very important bench player and a very good bench player. He was injured to start the season for a large portion of it, but when he has been healthy, he's giving similar contributions to last season, can win us a quarter or even a half just with his shooting alone. Got us back into a game against the New Orleans Pelicans where we were down and out. He totally just shot us back into the game. I think that may have even been his first game back from injury. We didn't end up winning it, but he got us back into it. His rebounding is great, and so I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Just very similar contributions to last season. Been a very, very important bench piece for us. And now kind of the last bench guy who seems to really have cemented his role as the eighth guy off the bench. And we'll talk about the ninth guy because there have been some interesting developments. But Alex Len has kind of cemented himself as the backup center. And I don't know why it took this long. He started off the season playing really well when he got the chance at backup center over JaVale McGee. Then he got injured, was out for like 1 to 2 months. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But then he came back and earned his spot back as the backup center, obviously backing up Domantas Sabonis. He plays limited minutes, although we did see him play a little next to Sabonis against the Bucks. But other than that, we haven't seen him play next to Sabonis. But when he is out there in those very limited 10 to 15 minutes, he is just the definition of just solid. Just a trustworthy backup big who knows his role. He's going to block shots in the paint. He's going to rebound the ball. He's going to set screens, and he's going to roll to the rim. He doesn't try to do anything that isn't within his skill set. He plays very much within himself, and there's just something about a guy knowing his role, coming in, executing it perfectly that I love to see. Last season at this point, he got a 4 out of 10. He wasn't really given much of a shot in the regular season last season, but he made an impact in the playoffs. And now he's being given that shot in the regular season. He's taking advantage, and he's just been the complete opposite of JaVale McGee, who's the other option. And obviously we'll get to that. And so I'm going to give Alex Len an 8.5 out of 10. And now we move on to Sasha Vezenkov, the rookie. The veteran rookie, obviously, EuroLeague MVP last season. He's been very in and out of the rotation, but lately seems to be finding his spot and giving very positive contributions. Usually when he's come in this season, he's been giving positive contributions. The problem and why he's been out of the rotation at times is he just plays a very similar role to Trey Lyles, to Harrison Barnes, even to Kevin Huerter. And so there's not always a spot, but he's kind of been playing the backup 3 lately, and then when we go small, he'll be the 4. He's been a streaky shooter, and I don't think he's fulfilled his full potential as a shooter in his short time in the NBA. Fox and others have talked about how he's one of the best shooters they've ever seen, and his funky and super quick release is fun to watch, but he's been a little inconsistent this season. But I do think that with more consistent minutes, we'll see more consistent shooting from him. But he's been a really solid team defender, which was the big question mark, being, a little bit slow-footed, not the most athletic, but he's blocked some shots, not just like coming from behind or against a smaller guy. Like he's gone up and got some shots. Very surprising. And he's picked smaller guys' pockets, also very surprising. Like he's a very surprisingly good defender, I guess. And his off-ball movement offensively has been really good. And so I'm giving him a 6 out of 10. Because coming in, the expectations, there were some expectations, being the EuroLeague MVP, kind of getting hyped up. But, not too many. And so I think him being kind of getting into the rotation lately, I think that bumps him up a little over just the average of a 5. So he gets a 6. And now we move on to guys that aren't really in the rotation. Some of them have been in the rotation at times, but right now they're not. So we'll probably go a little quicker here. Davion Mitchell, 2 out of 10. He had a 6.5 out of 10 last season, which was one of the lowest on the teams last season. At this point, at the halfway point, 2 out of 10 here. Just very disappointing. Coming into his 3rd season, I was hoping to see development from him, but he has honestly gotten worse defensively. Guys are just shooting right over him, and I don't think his point of attack defense has been as good as it has been in the past. And that is his one strength. And so if that's not even as good as it used to be, then he's really not adding anything else, because he's not a primary ball handler. And at 6 foot, he can't shoot very well. So he's not adding anything offensively. He can't finish around the rim very well. He's not a great playmaker. So he's adding a nothing offensively. He's a net negative, and he hasn't been as good defensively. Just very disappointing. I was hoping to see, a leap from him coming into his 3rd year, and he's gone the opposite direction, fallen totally out of the rotation. And it seems like the Kings are kind of giving up on him. Now we move to JaVale McGee. I'm going to give him a 3 out of 10. At times, he has given this team positive contributions, but usually the positives come with a lot of negatives as well. He's very erratic, does not play within himself like Alex Len, tries to do too much, thinks he's better than he is offensively, falls for pump fakes, goes for blocks he's not going to get, which leads to offensive rebounds. The one thing he does do well is he provides a vertical lob threat. He's still very athletic, even at the age of 36. But I was hoping that he could come in and be the backup center, and he just lost that spot. So 3 out of 10. Then we move to Chris Duarte, who the Kings traded 2 second-round picks to kind of take a flyer on in the offseason. And I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10. He has started some games, I think similar to KZ Okpala starting at the start of last season. Just the Kings trying to find a defensive guy. But he just hasn't been able to find the line between playing physical but also not fouling. He's been fouling a lot. And then offensively, sometimes his decision making is just not great. Sometimes it feels like he's shooting too much. Sometimes he's passing up open shots. He just hasn't really found his groove offensively. He was given a shot as the starter and off the bench in the rotation, and he just didn't take it. Has at times provided some solid minutes, and he did improve the defense when he got into the starting lineup, but just has fallen out of the rotation now. So 4 out of 10. Then we move on to Kessler Edwards, who wasn't on the team at a point last season. But for him, I can't give a grade, because he just hasn't really been given much of an opportunity. Occasionally, he'll come in for a defensive possession. He'll also come in sometimes in garbage time. He just got sent down to the G League and had a pretty solid game. You can tell in the garbage time minutes, he's trying to just fire away from 3, because I think he feels, and he's probably been told, that he just needs to be a good 3-point shooter to be able to have a spot in the rotation. But we just haven't seen enough from him. And that probably just means in what we're not seeing, in practice or, in the preseason training camp, he probably just didn't show enough. He was a guy I liked the Kings taking a chance on for no cost at the trade deadline last season. But obviously there's a reason that the Nets gave him up for free, and it's because he wasn't quite there yet, and he may never get there as a rotational player. But he does provide length, and he's a solid defender, but he just needs to be able to find that 3-point shot. Then we have our rookie Colby Jones. And being a rookie, obviously don't expect much from him. Spent a lot of time in the G League. But from what we have seen from him, I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. Because I think when he has come in, he's had great defensive instincts. He's a stat sheet stuffer. He's going to get rebounds. He's going to be that secondary playmaker, and he can score the ball. And I think he's just a very smart player. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot from him, but I do think what he just needs to improve on is being more confident when he's attacking the basket, because he is a good finisher, but he just hasn't totally shown it yet. He looks a little timid at times with the ball, but I think he has clearly shown that he will be a solid rotational player at some point in the future in the NBA. Now, the last guy who is on a regular NBA contract is Juan Toscano-Anderson. Actually, I don't even think he's on a contract anymore. His 10-day just ended. The Kings had signed him to a non-guaranteed deal. Then they waived him. Then they signed him to a 10-day. So a very short stint. Obviously not a shooter. He didn't provide any spacing. Couldn't finish around the basket. And I just don't think he was good enough defensively. I'm not going to give him a rating just because we just didn't see a lot of him. I think that's a little, unfair to him, but I don't think he did enough to get a roster spot. And then we move on to the two ways. Just quickly, Jalen, Slawson, and Jordan Ford have spent almost their entire time in the G League. Jordan Ford's kind of just the emergency backup point guard. Jalen, Slawson, a very raw athlete, a big, super athletic guy. If he can get that three-point shot falling, he can definitely be an NBA player. But the one two-way player that has actually made an impact is Keon Ellis, and I really didn't expect that. But because Davion Mitchell was playing really poorly, he got a shot, kind of playing backup point guard, but also he's in there with Monk. And now Monk has totally taken over backup point guard, like officially. Like he kind of unofficially was before, but now he's officially the backup point guard. And so Keon Ellis, for a time, was in the rotation, and I think he was great defensively. And he's just a pest. He's going to get his hands in the passing lanes, going to get his hands on the ball, provides defensive intensity. He's knocked down the three at times this season, and so that's very important for him. And so I'm giving him a 9 out of 10, just because he unexpectedly, for a time, had a rotation spot. And I didn't expect that for him in his second year, being an undrafted guy. It depends what happens at the trade deadline, but if the trade deadline passes and the Kings have an open roster spot, I think he'll clearly get that roster spot. And so hopefully he can continue improving, and he looks like he's on the trajectory to be an NBA player, which is really exciting because I feel like we haven't seen many of those guys, the second round or the undrafted guys playing in Stockton. I don't feel like we've seen a lot of those guys come through and be NBA players for the Kings. And obviously around the NBA, not a lot of those guys do, but I feel like for the Kings, it's even less guys than average. You look at a guy like Gabe Vincent, who was in Stockton, who now is, went to the Heat, was great, and got his contract with the Lakers. It's like we missed out on that, and we just haven't been able to develop or find those guys. And so it's exciting if we do have one in Keon Ellis that can be a rotational player. But that is everyone. The Kings are in a fine spot right now. Obviously you don't want to be sitting 7th. It could have been so much better with some of the games that the Kings threw away or lost to some bad teams. But overall, they're right in the thick of it. We know that trading for a defensive wing or even a two-way wing, if they go for a big swing, could vault this team into the very top of the Western Conference. And so I think the Kings, as much as, it may be slightly disappointing where they're at, I think they're sitting in a good spot to make a run in the second half of the regular season. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Royal Report. Make sure to check out my recaps after every single Kings game. And so I will see you guys then. Peace.